Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, separation, and parenting apart. If your marriage or partnership has ended, or you have friends and family who are separating, this podcast is for you. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Actionable, the online legal service for separating couples. In each episode, we look at relationships and separation from different angles, including the emotional, legal, and social. I'm joined by experts and special guests who share their own unique stories, experience, and tips, with the goal of helping people end relationships in a kinder and better way. Today, we're talking about toxic relationship patterns, shame, and self-esteem with Sarah Worsen, founder of Coastal Coaching Sussex Limited. Sarah shares her own experience of staying in unhealthy relationships and the deeper patterns behind it. We explore how shame shows up after a breakup, especially if you were the one who left, how childhood experiences shape adult relationships, and why low self-esteem can make separation feel even harder. It's an honest, compassionate conversation about understanding yourself and finding their way forward. Just a quick heads up before we begin. This episode covers content that some listeners might find distressing, including poor mental health. If you loved this episode, then please subscribe and rate us on your preferred listening platform. Welcome, Sarah. It's lovely to have you.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's great to be here.
Fabulous to have you. And just to give the context for everybody, this discussion is going to focus on shame and why am I so ashamed of my divorce? That's the context for this conversation. So maybe, Sarah, with that in mind, would you start off by giving us a bit of an insight into your own personal story?
Sure. So, as you'd said in the bio, there were quite a lot of foundations that created these toxic relationships for me. And whilst I would love to say that it started in adulthood and it was just one relationship, it really wasn't. It was a series of relationships, really. All of the relationships with men I got involved with all had a toxic element of them, bar one or two. And then my self-esteem and my own self-concept, I think, were really low. So although I don't regret my first marriage, certainly with everything I have learned since, it's not something that I would have entered into. I was at the time, was still quite religious and took my marriage vows very seriously. And throughout the deterioration of our relationship, which happened over quite a prolonged period of time, really, when things were happening that were, in hindsight, really not acceptable and not okay in a relationship, I would just tell myself that I was married, I'd taken this vow, and to break that vow, it would be my fault. It would be down to me if I decided to leave the marriage. And for me, that whole thing of, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, the better for worse, really stood out to me. And I wanted to remain committed to that marriage, even though the behaviors weren't okay. And so the idea of leaving it took me a long time to deal with the inner shame I felt before I'd even told anybody else or ended the marriage. My journey of shame started probably 18 months before the actual breakdown of the marriage. And making my own peace with that was probably one of the biggest issues that I had throughout the whole of, the problems that we experienced, which was really hard.
Maybe we should just sort of explain a little bit about shame, and when we're talking about shame, what we mean, from a psychological perspective. I guess the way that we used to remember it in psych classes was guilt is about a specific behavior. Shame is that sense of feeling that you haven't met an internal standard, which it's the holistic kind of feeling, the overwhelming holistic feeling that you get with shame, whereas guilt's are very specific around behaviors, aren't they? So it sounds to me like that's kind of what you're talking about here, that overwhelming sense that you would be a bad person as a whole if this one behavior of leaving your marriage was acted upon. Is that right? Is that how it was feeling?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, for me, I think the two were interlinked, but definitely I had tarnished myself as being the person at fault if I ended that marriage, even though it was based on his behaviors, and that feeling of shame of not meeting. And yes, there was a big part of it being my own expectations, but it was also everybody else's expectations. I was a massive people pleaser at the time. I worried about what other people would say and what they would think. I worried massively about the whole societal thing, that even though times have changed a lot, that even 15 years ago, there would have been, I mean, maybe it was just in my head, maybe it was my own story, but I felt that everybody would know and everybody would judge. And because I'd been the one that ended it, it almost mitigated any blame on his side. So the focus wouldn't be on about he had behaved in a way that I didn't feel was acceptable and I therefore ended the marriage. The focus would be on the fact that I ended the marriage. And then he just got away with everything that he'd done. And that was another kind of strand of it. I think shame is incredibly complex and has a lot of different things that kind of bond into it, really.
So it's a sense of that instigator shame then, whereas the victim is always the person who's the non-instigator, and it's the person who's doing the telling and who's, we might reframe that as saying the brave person who is bringing a halt to this and saying these behaviors aren't acceptable. I'm putting my boundary in. And it's the sense that made you a bad person. And I guess you say it was people pleasing, but also from the sound of it, if you're religious or you've got that religious kind of side to you, then it's not just about the people around you, is it? It's a whole doctrine of religion that says you have to stick with this, you have to stay married, and being married is the most important thing, and remain faithful to the vows. So it feels like a huge weight. You mentioned as well that this had sort of been born out of ultimately your relationship with your parents as a child and that kind of thing. How does our early experience play into feelings that may come a lot later down the line, for example, when you divorce or separate or end a relationship?
So my experience, and now my experience with working through lots of other people, was that when we are young, we follow adults as if they are always right. We follow their teachings, we follow their experiences, and we think that they are infallible. Whereas obviously, being a parent now, I can completely see the human side of that, and we do make mistakes. But where I'd started in early childhood, where my parents and I, being an only child, we were super, super close, had a really close-knit relationship, and I spent a lot of time with them and with their friends and what have you. And as far as I was concerned, we were like the Three Musketeers. And then life experiences happened from about the age of 9 for me. And that played a massive part in the breakdown of mine and my parents' relationship. Now, I didn't know what was going on. So I, as humans, particularly children, always do. If you don't know what's going on, you'll create a story to fill the gap. And my story was that I'd done something terribly wrong, that my parents didn't love me anymore, all incredibly misguided, but still very true to me. I didn't feel that I could, certainly at that age, I wasn't in a position where I could create a discussion between us to talk about it more openly. So I carried this story. And of course, once you decide on a story, your unconscious mind then looks for the evidence that is going to support that. So if you create a story of not being good enough, not being important enough, not being seen, not being heard, A, that becomes an expectation for you in future relationships. And B, you're constantly looking for information that backs that story up. So the information that you are gathering, something happens and you go, yeah, that's reiterating I'm not good enough. I'm reiterating I'm not loved. All of these things. And then that creates this pattern. So of course, then instead of it just being that's what you expect, it then becomes what you focus on grows, and what you focus on then becomes your reality. So I focused on relationships and attracting, almost magnetizing those people who would behave in the same ways as my parents had. And therefore, I wasn't worth very much. So why would I expect to have a relationship that was full of respect and deep love and great communication? Because A, I hadn't seen it, and B, I hadn't experienced it.
It's super interesting what you're saying. And like you say, we often hear people talk about, staying together because of the children or whatever. But when you're in that kind of toxic relationship where it isn't working, then the behavior you're modeling to children, and like you say, children are sponges, they're looking, aren't they, all of the time to copy adults and to see how the world works through our eyes. It becomes incredibly important that that actually what you really need to do is create a positive communication channel to talk to kids about what's going on, to provide them with reassurance, and then to make those decisions that you need to make for your families. It must have been incredibly difficult. At what point do you think you started to recognize how your sort of childhood played into your feelings of shame and to recognize that you were repeating a toxic sort of pattern? What happened to give you that insight? Because I guess many people might be on the cusp of consciousness about repeating patterns or toxicity in a relationship. So, what got you to the point of fully understanding what was going on and seeing your pattern for what it was?
I mean, I can tell you the exact moment where the penny dropped. So I remember after the relationship had broken down, we had put the house on the market and sold, and Owen and I had moved, my son and I had moved into this flat together. And I immediately knew that that was going to be the place that put me back together, but I didn't quite know what that meant. And then one particular Saturday, I can literally picture it even now. I was sitting on the sofa, the flat had been set up, and, it was a good place to be, a safe place for me to be. And I remember sitting on the sofa. It was a Saturday. Owen wasn't due home until the Sunday evening. And I suddenly realized that I was sitting there just waiting to be his mum again. And that then led into, I don't know what I want to do whilst I'm waiting for this to happen. I don't know what makes me happy. I don't know what I like. I don't know who I am. And then that thought process led on to, Owen is 3 now. And he had, I think about 2 or 3 days before, we'd been in the car coming back to the flat. And he's always been an old head on young shoulders. And he's sitting in his car seat next to me in the front of the car. And he puts his little hand on my lap and he goes, I'm glad I don't live with Daddy anymore. There's no shouting now. And I really, really thought that I had completely managed to shield him from everything that had been going on. But this little sponge had been soaking up everything that had happened. And so that thought process also came through during this moment of, oh my goodness. And I suddenly realized that he wasn't the first by a long shot. And did it mean that he was the last? I'm not sure it did. And so then I suddenly thought, well, what if not knowing and liking me and not knowing what makes me happy means I'm more susceptible to attracting this kind of person? So it followed quite a clear pathway quite quickly. It was like a massive, not just a light bulb moment, but just like a ton of light bulbs of, this has got to change. You don't know who you are. You don't know what you want. How can you expect to have a healthy relationship with somebody else when you don't even have a relationship with yourself, let alone a healthy one? And I was so desperate that Owen would never pick up on toxic vibrations from a relationship again. And I realized it started with me. I realized that it was something that I needed to do for me.
It's super interesting, isn't it? Because so many parents that I speak to, and we have conversations and they'll say, oh, the kids don't know what's going on. I'm just going to sit it out. It's fine. And I always think to myself, how do you say to a parent, oh, they do? Because, we're all experts in our own children. You can't pretend you know what's going on. But, your story is so interesting because, and your son was so young. He's 3 and he's saying that to you at 3. So if your kid is 5 or 7 or 9 or 10, then they are aware when things are wrong, even if they don't have the words always for it. They can feel, and they're storing up, aren't they, those feelings, which is what you were describing at the beginning of this. from your experience of being at home with your parents and storing up messages that can lie dormant, that don't always come out in the immediate term, do they? Because you're navigating your sort of tween age and then your teens, and you might not be on that sort of communication side with your parents where you're sharing your every thought or what you think about boys or girls or whoever it is that you fancy. So I think it takes a little longer for this to play out sometimes, doesn't it? And it's usually, as you say, at the time when you're entering relationships for the first time, that some of that stuff that has been absorbed from parental relationships then starts to play out in your own. I think it's super fascinating.
What you're saying about the stories lying dormant is so incredibly true. It's not like a story goes in. So my belief is children always know what's going on in terms of they can pick up on the vibration. The problem is they don't know the factual part of it. And where they don't know the facts, they'll fill in the story. So that could be as simple and straightforward as mummy and daddy are arguing. That must be about me.
Yeah, because kids of a young age and a certain age are still egocentric. They haven't learned that, we all get trapped into that, don't we? We often oversubscribe people's motives to being about us when that's just our egos talking. And very often the way people behave is nothing to do with us. It's what's going on internally for them. It's their bad day. It's their, rubbish row they've just had with a partner, or it's their train that's late, or whatever it is. So I think that's something that's very amplified in kids, isn't it? That sense of
Definitely.
if something is wrong, it is about me. It's the
me.
natural negative wiring of the human condition, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, that kind of thought process of it's all about me obviously has benefits as well, but it doesn't have benefits in this scenario. It doesn't have benefits in the way we live our lives now in the same way. We're supposed to be self-absorbed as children. That's how we take in information and learn and not worry about what everybody else is thinking about us. Like we don't worry when we're learning to walk. If we fall down, people will laugh at us and think we're stupid, but we do as we get older. So, those stories are going in and being fed into your unconscious mind. And then as an adult, some of the things that you don't even think about that are just reactionary behaviors, when actually we copy them back. So when clients come to work with me, they always think they know what the problem is. And actually, I would say probably 97% of my clients have come to me with problem A, but the reality is that it's problem Z over here that they haven't even tweaked. So, in terms of those stories, they stay there for a long time. And a lot of people are running on this unconscious programming that they've got no idea where it's really come from. And it's only when you start to get curious and question that you can start to really unpick and make some massive changes in your life.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, we know that we only indulge in behaviors that somehow serve us. Yeah. So with the toxic patterns that you're talking about, what are you getting from it? And maybe you can personalize it. What were you getting from being in those toxic relationships that kept you going back and repeating that cycle? Because it's very easy when you're on the outside of this, isn't it, to say, well, if someone treats you badly, why would you not recognize it the next time? Why would you stay? You hear that all the time with cases of domestic violence and abuse. Why do you stay? And that kind of thing. So there must be, what are you getting out of the toxicity that is keeping you and holding you in that pattern or encouraging you to repeat?
So my own personal experience, and I'm certainly not saying that this was everybody, I was always very dramatic and very much known for that. And that was just me, wasn't it? I ricocheted from drama to drama and, there was always a story. And so for me, one big part of it looking back was attention. There was a benefit of, oh, poor Sarah, how awful, this situation's happen again, et cetera, et cetera. And also I got to avoid things as well. Like we won't give that task to Sarah because she won't be able to cope with that much. And so there were certainly benefits from that side of things. The underlying undercurrent bubbling through that story was also, I didn't really think that I deserved anything different from that. And I certainly didn't think that I was in a position to take control of it. I had a very strong belief that my cards were dealt and I just had to deal with whatever life threw at me. And for me, life decided that I would have a lot of drama, a lot of negativity. And this wasn't just in relationships. This was everything. My health was very up and down, very nightmarish, both physically and mentally. I had eating disorders, or an eating disorder that just kind of kept playing up over time. My health was appalling. If something was going to happen to somebody, it would always seem to happen to me. And I think also I quite enjoyed, in hindsight, holding court a little bit about those things. Like there was another story to entertain people. There was another thing to dine out on. So yes, so partially I liked the attention from it, and partially I didn't realize that I could change it.
Interesting. I imagine there will be people listening to this that can recognize that then as well in themselves and can see what might be holding them in those toxic patterns. Hello, my lovely listeners. I hope you're finding this episode helpful and comforting. I just wanted to take a moment to share some news. I've written a book and it's called Amicable Divorce. It's a practical guide to separating with dignity, supporting your children and navigating finances and co-parenting without unnecessary conflict. It's all the guidance you can usually find on the podcast and much more. If that sounds helpful, you can pre-order it today on Amazon. Thanks so much, and now let's get back to the show. Let's talk a little bit about shame then. Why do you think that so many of us, and I'm saying us because I'm desperately trying not to include myself in this bracket, but I can't not. Why do so many of us still feel some lingering or even some huge catastrophic sense of shame around divorce and separation, even when we know it is the absolute healthiest and right choice for us? What's pinning that shame still?
So my experience with the shame was very much around expectations, and those expectations I felt had been set upon me by other people, by society, but certainly by myself.
So just to be clear there then, Sarah, you mean the expectation that you will live happily ever after? Is that what we're talking about? The expectation that you'll meet somebody, you'll fall in love, you'll make a successful marriage of it? Is it that kind of expectation?
No, the expectation is you stay married no matter what.
Yeah, exactly. So you fall in love, you will be happy ever after. There'll be no separating of ways or anything like that. That's the expectation you're sort of describing.
I mean, it wasn't even that you'll be happy. It's just that once you're married, you're there.
Right. Okay. So it's less glamorous or fairy tale than I was describing then. It's just,
Definitely.
This is it. You're done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You found somebody who's willing to marry you. You've said yes. You will now have a family together. And no matter what the challenges you face, you will stay together, even if you're utterly miserable. That was my expectation. I don't remember thinking at any point, this is going to be happy ever after, that this was my princess love dream, that I had found my soulmate. I don't remember any of that ever feeling like the truth for me. And I look back at that and I think, you poor love, that you didn't even think that at the very beginning when it was good. You didn't even believe it at that point. And of course, in my head, I was just being realistic. But the idea then of letting that part down, what will people think, was like a big thing when I was younger. What will people think? What will people say? And the reality is, actually, lots of people think you're incredibly brave, but the shame sits there because you are not meeting expectations. And some of those expectations were my own. And I have always had really high standards for myself. I'm much more self-compassionate and much kinder on myself now. But when I was younger, it was like, this is how it is and you deal with it no matter what. So for me, the shame of telling myself this story of, I will stay no matter what, I will stay married no matter what. I've watched my parents go through this really toxic relationship between the two of them. The idea of breaking that expectation and not remaining in that marriage was so great for me. So great. That was a real massive stumbling block for me.
I guess it's personal, isn't it? Because not everybody listening will feel the same reason for feeling the shame. So I was just listening to you thinking, and I think mine's something to do with being ultra competitive and thinking, well, if everyone else can make a marriage work, then why can't I? And that, I think that drives probably my sense of shame. Why can other people do it and I can't? And for me, that's my thing. So I guess it will be different. But ultimately, what we're saying is we create stories and expectations of ourselves that probably come from childhood or teenhood or whatever. And then those expectations are what help embed a sense of shame when we don't meet that standard that we've set for
Absolutely.
ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I remember nights, and this happened for months and months and months, but every night I would make sure that he was asleep first. I would then go into the bathroom. I would grab the big, fat, thickest bath sheet towel off the side, and I would snotty sob cry into it, asking at the time God for a sign that it was all going to be okay and I should stay, or for a sign that I needed to go. And then nothing would happen. And of course, nothing happened because I'd already got 80 signs that day that this was not a good idea to remain in that situation. And so there were no signs that I should just be a good girl and stay. And so it's a bit like God was kind of saying, how many more signs do you want that this is a really bad place for you to be and not psychologically safe? And, it was a terrible experience. And one of the worst parts, again, this sort of feeds into the shame, is when he didn't have a drink in him, he was the gentlest, loveliest man. And that's what everybody else saw. So not only would I be letting him down, his family down, my family down, there was all the joint people that we knew who would be like, oh, well, not him. He's lovely.
Yeah, the sense that nobody quite believes your narrative and nobody quite believes exactly. I think that's a huge frustration for people, isn't it?
And then, of course, is it something I'm doing? Am I driving him to behave in this way? So again, that self-shame in a way of, well, it must be me. It must be me making him do these things that then result in these terrible, frightening behaviors when he'd been drinking. And so again, the shame fed into, well, it must be something I'm doing to result in that happening. So another kind of layer of that shame on top of everything else.
And it sounds like from what you're saying there, that last bit about, this must be my fault. That to me feels like the self-esteem issue, doesn't it? So yeah, that sense that by this point you're so overwhelmed by shame that your self-esteem is just on the floor and that you can't think of yourself as a good person or an effective person. And therefore you're just at a point where it's very hard to act at all, isn't it? It's interesting what you say about it not being particularly palatable in our world for people to describe themselves as broken or whatever, because I think we are constantly looking for the upside and the happy ending, aren't we? That's part of the world that we inhabit, and trying to make people or help people feel less ashamed, more confident. So I understand what you're saying by that. And it's tempting to sort of move this conversation on to go, all right then, Sarah, so what did you do to recover and all the rest of it? But I'm deliberately not going to go there because it's such an interesting conversation just to listen to you talk about, where the pain was and where you have been, rather than there having to be that happy ending on the end of it, which, obviously there is because you've turned your life around. You now help people go through this. So I guess I'm going to point people to your website and your services if they want to see the end result. But I'm just conscious of time as well. I'm going to ask you in a minute to share, your top tips to how you move people from the beautiful, I'm going to say it's beautiful, the beautiful way, the gentle way you've described, the pain of where you've been and how you get them to move forward with their lives, to build back when they're going through a separation. And I know nobody's going to want to miss that bit, but just want to say that before we do that, if this episode has resonated, if it feels like somebody at last is speaking your language and you've heard something that Sarah said that makes you feel comforted by knowing that you're not alone, then if it's you or if it's somebody you know that might benefit from that, please do share And please do follow us so that we can make the Divorce Podcast a favorite on your favorite listening platforms, so that you are here with us each week when we're offering a safe emotional space, real advice, real support for you as you go through your separation or divorce. So please do share this episode if you've been touched by it. So Sarah, just talk us through them practically, some top tips so people can recognize some of those patterns that we've talked about, whether they're in a toxic relationship, whether they're feeling a sense of shame. What can they do to turn things around when they're going through a separation?
Okay. So obviously, I think it would be unusual for somebody's self-esteem and self-worth to not be knocked by the whole relationship breakdown side of things. But I think the biggest starting point for me was really getting out of my head and down onto paper, or if you're not a fan of writing, into your phone, all of the things that you think about yourself. Because my experience is you cannot sort your thoughts out whilst they're in your head. And you might not realize how significant your negative behaviors and thoughts are until you actually start to try and capture them and get them out. And then look at that list and think, would I say this to a friend? And actually, probably what you'll look at is go, God, I wouldn't even say that to somebody I didn't like, let alone somebody that I did. But self-compassion is always the first step. And I've had clients who have tried to skip that step to improve their self-esteem, and there is no skipping it. Until you can be kinder to yourself, you simply will not grow your self-esteem. But when it comes to a relationship breakdown, it took two. It wasn't just you. Two people's behaviors. And ironically, it ended up being my parents' vicar that kind of said to me, Sarah, this isn't about you breaking a vow. This is about a contract that he had broken and you responded to. So actually you need to take your foot off your head and start giving yourself that compassion. The next step for me was then working out what refilled my cup and what made me happy, and started making sure that those things were inserted into every single week. So that could be as simple as, so for us, we're very lucky. We live near the sea. Coastal Coaching Sussex was born because the beach always put me back together again. So for me, it was, things like take a detour home to go via the seafront so that I could sit and look at the sea for a couple of minutes. It was buy a nice smelling candle. It was buy yourself flowers, all of those elements. And then as you start to understand what makes you a bit happier and a bit more contented, then it's about focusing on dating yourself. So do those things that then make you feel uncomfortable. Go for a coffee on your own. Go for dinner on your own. Go to the cinema on your own. Find places and things for you that help build you up. And sometimes that is getting out of your comfort zone a little bit and doing things that you haven't done before. I would say, although I'm married again, I am incredibly fiercely protective of me, of the person that I got to create through the darkest, heaviest, most challenging time of my life. And that alone time is still very important to me. My husband doesn't need that for himself, but he completely supports my need for it. And I can have that space without feeling guilty or anything. And those would be my three things. So write out what you are thinking about yourself, and then think about the impact that that would have on another person and see where you can change it. Work out what makes you happy and start to insert those into your life. And then start to get out of your comfort zone as you create a relationship and start dating yourself.
Wow, that is super impressive. 3 clear steps to take if you're in the mire of a divorce or a separation and you feeling as lost and shameful as you were and I have been as well. So I really like those, really appreciate the clarity with which you delivered those. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you so much for being a super honest and very interesting guest, Sarah. It's been an absolute treat to listen to you. Where can people find out more about you?
So the best place to start off with is my website, which is sarahwilson.co.uk. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. And because there are about 8 million Sarah Wilsons on LinkedIn, my name has a little blue butterfly after it. And obviously, the Inner Success Story podcast is on all major platforms. You are more than welcome to come and join me there. But it would be lovely to welcome you into my world. If you want to reach out either via DM or message on the website, please do so. I am absolutely here for you.
That's lovely. Thank you. And if you want separation or co-parenting support, you can visit amicable.co.uk, where you can explore all of our resources or book a free advice consultation. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm a little bit easier to find. I don't think there are that many Kate Dailies, but maybe you'll prove me wrong. You can also hear about new podcast episodes by subscribing for updates and following the divorcepodcast.com or on your favorite listening platform as well. And finally, don't forget, we love hearing from you. This is a community and a safe space for people to talk all things divorce, separation, or co-parenting. So please share your ideas for guests or ask us questions at hello@amicable.co.uk. And you never know, they might form the basis of a very new episode. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us today. It's been lovely talking to you. And thank you, everyone, for listening.